Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
The papacy in France. So we had hinted at how it is that over in England and France there was some fighting going on, which we call the 100 Years' War. What's going to happen is this complicated history is going to take the papacy out of Rome. The popes are not going to be living in Rome. The popes are going to be living in France. Think about the irony of that for a moment, because who is the pope? The pope, by definition, is the bishop of Rome. If you're going to be the pope, being a pope means you are the bishop of Rome. What happens now when the bishop of Rome is not living in Rome, but is living in another place? Can you live in France and be the bishop of Rome, even though you've never visited Rome? That's going to be the question that we come to. What is the Roman Catholic Church, reflecting back on the history of all of this, going to say? That these were once a pope is out of Italy and no longer living in Italy, you're not a pope. To be the pope, you have to be the bishop where? Of Rome. So if you're not in Rome, these popes who are over in France now, in the border of France, in a town that we call Avignon, the Roman Catholic Church is going to refer to them not as popes, but as anti-popes. So every time we hear the word anti-pope, it simply means a pope that is named by cardinals of the church, but is not in Rome. So the papacy in France, the Franciscans were hopeful, because do we remember the name Giacomo Fiore from the last class? Giacomo Fiore believed that there was the age of the Father and then the age of the Son. Jesus came and there's the age of the Son. So if there's the age of the Father and the age of the Son, that must mean that the age of the Holy Spirit is coming. He believed that the age of the Holy Spirit was going to be initiated in the 13th century. There was a simple, humble Franciscan Pope, Celestine V, and so what are we thinking? The age of the Spirit is dawning. This humble Franciscan Pope, because remember there was the Franciscans who were preaching Giacomo Fiore's apocalyptic thought, they're thinking that he's going to bring in the age of the Spirit. What happened though? He resigned. So, Pope Benedict XVI resigning, nothing new in the church. Popes have resigned before. In this case, Celestine V, this simple Franciscan Pope, resigned. He was replaced by Boniface VIII. Boniface VIII declared a crusade to take the lands and castles of his opponents, the Colonna in Italy. So let's follow this for a moment. We know that we had various crusades against the Muslims in the Holy Land. We had various crusades over in this direction. But now he's declaring a crusade for what reason? To take the land away from a family that you don't like. So remember back to St. Augustine's definition of just war? Would this fit the definition of a just war? You know, if you're doing it for personal gain, if you're not doing it out of love, and it doesn't seem that he was doing it out of love, he was doing it to take the land and the possessions away from his enemies.
But I love that land.
I love that land. You're doing it out of love for the land.
For the money.
Right.
It comes from there.
Boniface at that time, Boniface VIII, also declared Albert of Habsburg, which is in modern-day Germany, he declared him a regicide, which means that he accused him of killing his predecessor, the former king. Regicide means that you've killed a king. Anyone here committed regicide? Okay. So if you committed regicide, you've killed a king. He's saying now that Albert of Habsburg was a regicide. He killed a king. And so what happens if you've killed someone? You're going to hell. Unless you're forgiven. Who's going to forgive you? The Pope. So suddenly Albert of Habsburg is bowing his head, asking forgiveness of the Pope. Before the 100 Years' War broke out, Boniface resolved to make peace between England and France. So we have the tension building between England and France. Boniface is trying to diffuse that and bring peace to the land. He's also forbidding clergy to contribute to secular power. Imagine that for a moment. So clergy are not in any way to support the kings of your lands, whether you're in France or in England. Clergy, stay out of it. Both kings respond with actions against the clergy. Why? Because power comes from one of two places. If you want power in this world, you either have to organize money or you have to organize people. What were clergy doing in their lands? Clergy, by nature of what they're doing every Sunday in England and in France, they were organizing people. Every Sunday they were getting people together. They were organizing people. And they were organizing money, because every time they organized those people, what did they do? They passed the basket. And so to have control of the priests was important for both secular leaders and church leaders alike. Back at that time, Scotland, so we remember on the British Isles, we have England on the Isles, but we also have Scotland. So there's going to be an interesting dynamic there, because what happens if you're a small country like Scotland thinking that the English are going to invade you? You better find some friends. Who did they ally with then? They declared themselves a fief of the Papacy. So, good Catholic Scots, the Scots, said, you English, if you're thinking of invading us, taking over Scotland, you just have to know that the Pope is going to come to our aid. Do you see the alliances that are being built here? So Scotland is aligning itself with the Papacy, which is great for Boniface, because Boniface dreamed that he was going to be the Lord of the universe, right? He had this dream of having universal power. Who would have universal power? The Pope. Yeah, there are all these nations and lands, but who's going to rule? The Pope. Boniface proclaimed a jubilee year. Think about the wisdom of this for a moment. What is a jubilee year? A jubilee year was essentially saying that you will get an indulgence if you visit St. Peter's tomb in Rome. What does that mean? What are you all doing tomorrow? Or next week or next month of this year? Because all of us, if we go to Rome and visit the tomb, we're going to get an indulgence. What's an indulgence? An indulgence means time out of purgatory, the forgiveness of sins. Awesome. So, there's a great economic engine that's going to be working here, because if all of us go to Rome and spend our money in Rome and buy the souvenirs that we buy, get the indulgences that we get, I mean, it's us contributing to the wealth of the Pope, and it's all of us acknowledging how it is that the Pope is the successor of Peter. The tradition had already sprung up of how it was that Peter was buried there in Rome, and the Vatican was built on that. So you were visiting Peter's tomb. Who is the successor of Peter?
Wow.
So Boniface proclaimed the Jubilee year, got people to Rome, bolstered his place in people's mind as Peter's successor. At the same time in France, what's happening? Philip IV is confiscating church land. Is that okay? If the governor of Texas came in one Sunday to Holy Family Catholic Church and said, we're taking over this property, how would we respond? Perhaps with a bit of resentment. So he is confiscating church land. He gave his sister to Albert of Habsburg. Have we seen his name before? Oh, that's the same one that the Pope said was a regicide. So obviously the Pope is not, he's not on the Pope's side. He's not aligned with the Pope in Germany. But instead, France is creating this alliance because he married off his sister, Albert of Habsburg. And also Philip in France gave asylum to the Colonna family. Where have we seen the Colonna family before? Oh, Boniface had declared a crusade to take over the land of whom? The Colonna family. Do you see how it is that there's this tension now between the papacy and France? Where's that going to go? Boniface is going to summon all of the French bishops to Rome because Boniface has a problem with France. Okay, what is he going to do? There are two sources of power, organize money or organize people. What is he going to do? He's going to organize people. He's going to bring all of the French bishops to Rome. Ooh. Philip is smarter than that. Is Philip going to let them go to Rome? No, because Philip is the king, not the Pope. So Philip says, you cannot leave France without my permission. You're a bishop now, what do? Do you go to France? Do you leave France and go to Italy because your Pope told you to come? Or do you stay in France because your king told you to stay? Same time, Philip made an alliance with England. So what's going to happen is, once people start making alliances, other people start getting scared, right? If Scotland makes an alliance with the Papacy, suddenly, if we're in England, we're not going to touch Scotland, right? If England and France are now making an alliance, what's going to happen? Ooh, they could turn against us. Who does the Pope make an alliance with? Funny thing happens. He makes an alliance with Albert of Habsburg, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So he makes an alliance with Albert of Habsburg. The French Parliament, which at that time was called the Estates General, asked Philip to call a council to judge the false Pope Boniface, right? The Pope is not a real Pope. Let's call a council here in France to depose this Pope for doing what he's doing. Additionally, Philip IV had an advisor who accused Boniface of being a heretic, a sodomite, and a false pope. Okay, so we have 3 charges being brought up against the Pope. Boniface, in response, is going to excommunicate Philip. Do you remember the story, what happens there? So, on the night before he's getting ready to excommunicate Philip, he's having them draw up the documents. The next day we're going to seal them and send them out in the mail. What happened that night? He was kidnapped. He was kidnapped the day before the proclamation. He was humiliated. Says Dr. Gonzalez, he was seated backward on a horse and paraded on a horse backward through the city. Essentially meaning what? Look at this. Backward Pope. Think of the symbolism of that gesture. Look at your backward Pope. And he died shortly thereafter. He's died then. Boniface is gone. The cardinals elect Benedict XI. Benedict XI is going to restore the land confiscated by Boniface to the Colonna family. Seems a nice gesture. But while Benedict XI is Pope, what's happening? Philip is still not happy with the events that have happened, and he insists on judging the dead Pope. We talked about how it is that some people are going to die, and then if they're going to be judged. We talked about the cadaveric council as well last class, right? What was the cadaveric council? How they exhumed, Pope Stephen exhumed the remains of a dead Pope and put the remains on trial. And then they mutilated the remains and burned them. So now Philip is going to insist on judging the dead Pope. Is Benedict going to allow that? No. That would be a dangerous precedent to start, allowing kings to dig up our remains and put us on trial. It's not a good precedent. And Benedict died shortly thereafter, roughly a year after being named Pope. The French supported the election of Clement V, and so note that name. Every time you hear the name Clement, it's going to be someone who's aligned with France, and Clement is going to be one who's going to take the papacy out of Rome to France. So what's the story of Clement V? This is the 1300s. He was Pope from 1305 to 1314, so that's 9 years as Pope. Did he ever visit Rome? Never visited Rome. But he was named Pope. He was named Bishop of Rome. So then, in the view of the Roman Catholic Church, now begins the line of the anti-popes, of those who are Bishop of Rome in name, but aren't in Rome. The French supported the election of Clement V. He never visited Rome. He named 24 cardinals, 23 of whom were French. Ooh, wait a minute. Follow me there? If you name 24 cardinals, 23 of which are French, what are you doing? You're stacking the deck. Right? That would be like, we've seen in recent years how it is that a person like Benedict named several cardinals. What happens when you're naming cardinals? Those are the people who are going to name your successor. So you're helping to ensure that whatever it is that you start continues. So he named all these French cardinals. Philip forced him to suppress the Templars. Remember that the Templars were a military order that arose after the Crusades. And so these Templars, almost like the Knights of Columbus, right? If you want power, what do you have to do? You have to organize people and or money. The Knights of Columbus, how have they become... Okay, we're focusing on the Knights of Columbus. We'll come back to the Templars in a moment. How have the Knights of Columbus become so powerful in the church? Oh, funny thing, they have a life insurance program. What happens when people are paying for life insurance every month? You're getting lots of insurance premiums. The Knights of Columbus enjoyed the power that they do in the Roman Catholic Church because of the wealth that they have. What was happening with the Templars? A similar military order where they had amassed all sorts of money and all sorts of lands. If you're the king looking around for money, what are you going to do? You're going to look at possible ways to get that money. Why not get rid of the Templars? So Philip forced Clement to suppress the Templars. How did they do that? When Clement suggested that Philip had no authority over the Templars, because Philip is saying, we have to do something with these Templars, this military order, we have to do something with them. The Pope tells the king, well, you have no authority over them. They're a spiritual group. They're a military order of the church. Okay? Philip accused Clement then of conspiring with the Templars in the evils, the supposed evils, we should say, that they were committing. Clement yielded to... Clement is saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You're accusing me of doing something I didn't do? Let's call a council of the church and let the council of the church, let the bishops decide. So Clement yielded to have a council judge the matter, but before the council reached a verdict, so the council called the trial, brought in the Templars, heard all the sides, a trial is going on. Trials can be expensive. We had to get all the bishops into town. We had to get all of the Templars into town. We have to pay for their accommodations. We have to pay for their food. This is becoming expensive. Before they reached a verdict, King Philip and Pope Clement agreed to dissolve the Templars, right? Rather than trying them, let's just dissolve the order. Let's just get rid of the Templars and all this is over. And when we dissolve the Templars, what are we going to do with all of their property? Well, says King Philip, wait a minute. If you as a church think that you're going to take that money and all their property that belonged to them, who's going to pay for the trial? So most of it went to pay the French for having hosted them for the trial. The leaders of the Templars, Jacques, was taken to Notre Dame in Paris and was burned alive. So the Templars are now dissolved. A sad, dark history we have as a church. Clement, 5 years before he died, he began living in Avignon, which is on the border of France. It's inside France. And so now popes would remain in Avignon for 70 years while claiming to be the Bishop of Rome. Can you be the Bishop of Rome without ever having visited Rome? That becomes the question. So the line now of anti-popes is established in Avignon, France. After Clement, we have John the 22nd. John the 22nd was elected as an anti-pope and reigned for 18 years. Ooh, imagine that. How old was he when he was elected? 72. 72 plus 18. That's making him a pretty old pope. Help me with the math. Is that 90 years old?
90.
The anti-pope, John the 23rd, is, we elected him at 72 thinking that he wouldn't live that long. He's just going to be a transition pope. Not the case. Right? Same with John the 23rd, who was elected in the 20th century. You know the story of John the 23rd? Right? We elected him because we thought, he's old enough that he'll just occupy the position. What did he end up doing? He ended up calling the Second Vatican Council. So we have John the 22nd, who was elected and reigned for 18 years, asserting the power of the papacy in Italy, even though he wasn't in Italy, and developing an elaborate system of ecclesiastical taxes. If you want power in this world, you have to organize one or two things: people or money. What was he doing? He was organizing the money. You all pay taxes. John the 22nd promised to return to Rome. Did he return to Rome? No. Instead, the next pope, let's clarify that. So, Benedict XII is now the next pope after John the 22nd. John the 22nd is replaced by Benedict XII. Benedict XII promises to return to Rome. Did Benedict XII return to Rome? Because now this is not acceptable to the people of Italy. Because we had Clement move the papacy to Avignon. We had John the 22nd in Avignon. Is this acceptable? It's not acceptable. The Bishop of Rome should be living in Rome. And so Benedict XII promised the people, yes, oh yes, 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 I'm coming. Did he come? Instead of coming, what did he do? He moved the papal archives from Italy to Avignon. So now the center of the church, the center of the Roman Catholic Church, the center of the Roman Church of the Western Church is not in Rome now for these 70 years. It's in Avignon. Which is why we often refer to this as the Avignon captivity. Because the church now is no longer centered in Rome, it's centered in Avignon. And interestingly, Benedict XII also ordered the construction of a palace in Avignon. And so if you get the chance to visit Avignon, you go there, and the papal palace in Avignon is still there to this present day. Dating from the 1300s, the papal palace, still in Avignon. The next pope, Clement VI, built up this court, because imagine, if you're taxing the people, what's happening? You're getting money coming in the door. And when you're getting money coming in the door, you can get around yourself a nice court, such that Clement VI, his court, rivaled the pomp and the luxury of any secular lord. Innocent VI was the next anti-pope. He began making preparations to return to Rome. Yes, I'm coming to Rome. Yes, I'm really the Pope. I'm the Bishop of Rome, I'm coming. But he died before he got back. Urban V was the next anti-pope. So all these are anti-popes. Urban V returned to Rome. But then what happened? You know what? Rome isn't what I thought it was. It wasn't as welcoming. It wasn't Rome, sweet Rome. Right? And so, unable to hold the Romans' loyalty, he hightailed it back to Avignon. The Pope who would finally return the papacy to Avignon would be Gregory XI. Gregory XI was elected Pope at what age? 17 years old.
Wow.
So just stop for a moment, people, and imagine for a moment, think of a 17-year-old that you know, and think of him or her being elected Pope at 17.
No.
How much wisdom is going to come from a 17-year-old Pope? So Gregory XI, who is a nephew of Clement VI, funny how things like this stay in the family, right? We called this nepotism during our last class, right? Nepotism is when you give family members certain privileges and power. Positions. So now the nephew of Clement VI, Gregory XI, is elected at age 17. And we see how it is that he was Pope for 8 years, which means that by age 25, he was no longer Pope. He was Pope from 17 to 25. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen during that time? During that time we have a saint of the church, whom today we know as Catherine of Siena, who would write to the Pope and plead for him to come back to Rome. Finally, in 1377, the year before he died, he came back to Rome. The papacy, the Bishop of Rome, came back to Rome. That was the Avignon captivity, or the Babylonian captivity in Avignon. Corruption in the church, what were some of the other ways, some of the various ways? Dr. Gonzalez also points out other means of corruption in the church. Simony or simony, we heard about that in the last class. You can pronounce it simony or simony. That's when ecclesiastical positions are sold. What's the advantage? If you want power, power comes from organizing people or money. One way to get money is by selling offices. So, anyone in this room, would anyone in this room like to be the next deacon at Holy Family? I tell you what, for a gift of, say, $40,000, you could be the next deacon. Do you think Angelita got it free?
Okay.
Deacon Roy, Deacon Cleopas, do you think that we just named them to their positions?
The champagne installment.
Cleo, can I get a loan? That was a loan.
So simony, we're just joking, of course.
Right. Of course.
But if that really happened, Or if Father Jamie bought his position in the church, if people bought their position in the church, that would be simony, or simony in the church. So ecclesiastical positions were being sold. But what happens when you start selling positions? Ooh, you know what? I'd like to be pastor of Holy Family Catholic Church. I think I'll buy that position. Pastor of Holy Family or Archbishop of Canterbury. Wouldn't it be fun to buy that position? Or what about Bishop of Rome? Right? Wouldn't it be fun to buy some of these things? What happens when people start buying positions in the church? Then we have challenges. First of all, people start buying multiple positions. Ooh, well, what if I bought the position of Archbishop of Canterbury and Bishop of Rome at the same time? Buying multiple positions. Also, absenteeism. Well, just because I bought the position of pastor at Holy Family doesn't mean I'm going to celebrate Mass there. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop in and say hello to the people. Let the deacons think you see that absenteeism then is going to be another problem that arises. So the corruption in the church that results from simony or simony, the selling of positions, include pluralism, having more than one ecclesiastical office, and also absenteeism, meaning, okay, you have the title, but do we ever see you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Other sources of corruption, nepotism, we mentioned last class, that's naming your relatives to positions of power. So as we saw last class, when the papacy was in that downward slide, how it was that a pope named we had the pope and then his son and then his grandson and also his nephew being named popes. That would be a good example of nepotism. If you're pope and your son is pope and your nephew is pope and your grandson is pope, that's probably a sign of nepotism. Keeping it all in the family. And so as a result of all this corruption, we had this clamor for reforming the church. People taking a look at the popes and saying, wait a minute, what's happening here?